Welcome everyone to Women in AI. So today we have an amazing session on path to entrepreneurship with an amazing line of speakers. I'm joined today, I'm Alessandra Sala, the Ambassador of Women in AI Ireland, and I'm joined with Swati, and she will be moderating through the different speakers and the Q&A session that we'll have at the end. So a couple of words to tell you who we are. Women in AI is a non-profit working towards gender inclusive AI that benefits global society. So a very simple mission to increase female representation and participation in AI. What do we do? Here we go. We are part of a global community. In Ireland, we have a very active community, but across the globe, we have 5,000 plus members. We are active in 100 countries, and we have 35 ambassadors in the world trying to foster and grow those communities. So we focus our initiative around 4 key pillars. The first one is create community engagement. The second one is to organize events like today, to bring information, to bring news, to bring ideas and knowledge to everyone who is interested in AI. We have an education programs, which I'll mention very briefly later, and we do research in the world of AI. So here in Ireland in particular, we have 3 main programs. The WAI Talks, like the event today, where we invite experts from the AI world to share experience, to share knowledge. And today we'll talk about entrepreneurship in particular. We have done a few events last year on, in general, new opportunity in an AI world, what it means to talk about ethics in AI, the future of healthcare and how AI can completely disrupt healthcare. And we have also been part of an AI summit where we have particularly addressed the UN Social Development Goal, a Sustainable Development Goal, and in particular, inclusive education and space. Our WAI learning program is our education program. It has 2 main pillars. Our certificate level, which is sponsored from the Irish government, will be launched on November 24th. It's a 12 weeks program to provide a certificate to people that want to enter the AI world. And then we also organize a practice group. It's a community learning effort where we get together in small groups and we all work together the same project in a collaborative manner. And it's learning together and sharing experience. We also would be amazing, feature amazing women in AI in Ireland that are taking a proactive step in showcasing female representation in this world. And I want to thank you, the amazing core team in Ireland, and in particular for this event, Begun and Ruadi, who have amazingly helped the organization of this event, and Laura and Claudia to the preparation and the collaboration with IBM. So a special thank you to our partner in crime for this event. IBM is an amazing supporter of women in AI. And today, IBM has showed great support in helping us to organize this event and showcasing how IBM is supporting entrepreneurship. So now I want to give it to Swati, and she will start to introduce our amazing lineup of speakers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alessandra, for the wonderful briefing on Women in AI and Women in AI Ireland. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to organize such an event during this pandemic. It's really nice to have such amazing lineup of speakers. I'm really interested to go through the event myself. Apologies if you hear some construction noise next to me. It's the alarm that goes off every day that I wake up to. Other than that, now we have a great event now. Now we have Patricia Scanlon, founder and CEO of SoapBox Labs. Before I get on to the introduction, Patricia, feel free to take over the screen if you like. Patricia is a well-known Irish entrepreneur. I have personally attended her talk in WIS conference last year. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to listen to her again. She founded SoapBox Labs in 2013. SoapBox Labs is a company that applies AI to develop voice and speech recognition applications that are specifically tuned to children's voices. It builds language learning applications for education like text reading and speech therapy, and modules for toys, gaming, voice control, AR, VR, robotics, and IoT. She holds a PhD and has 20 years of experience in speech recognition, technology, and machine learning systems. She has spent the majority of her career working on the commercialization of research innovations. Now let Patricia take over and tell you more.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that introduction. I appreciate it. So delighted to be invited today to give a talk at this event. It's really important, and I think it's really important. Thanks, Ali, for the nice background on this organization too. I really do support this, and I'm delighted to be able to share my story, and I hope it will help anybody who's thinking about this path, this entrepreneurship path. So, you know, as we said in was said in the introduction there, that I've been in the space for a long time, and it was the years of experience, and I went through a lot of different paths before I found, you know, the one I think suits me the best, which is entrepreneurship. You know, I started out as an engineer. I worked for a couple of years as an engineer doing kind of signal processing type work, some telecommunications, believe it or not, billing systems, lots of different things, until I went back to college to do a PhD, because I really, you know, I like the idea of being an inventor, basically. You know, I think I had this childhood ambition to be an inventor. And I started doing a PhD in speech recognition. And back in 2000, I mean, speech recognition was lousy. Like, we were doing very rudimentary stuff. It was very basic. The accuracy was terrible. It was, you know, we were kind of more dreaming about the idea of deep neural nets as opposed to actually implementing. We were primarily using hidden Markov models. But I really enjoyed the idea that engineering aspects that actually touch human life, you know, and then could potentially benefit it. And, you know, I found the research really interesting because I could see, you know, I was working with voices and I was working with images, I was working on all this really cool stuff like that, you know, for me lent a bit of, you know, it was tangible research, I think was a nice way to put it. And I worked for many years doing that. I moved to New York for a couple of years. I worked there in Columbia University, and then I got the chance to work in IBM research, which at the time was leading speech recognition. It was Via Voice was actually founded out of IBM just before they actually stopped doing speech recognition, about 2005, and Nuance took over. But it was a very interesting time to work in speech recognition technology. It was almost like it had a big burst and then everybody kind of calmed down from it. But I got to see lots of different things. I then started working in Bell Labs around 2004, I think. It's 2004, 2005, where that's where I met Ali, and I worked there for 7 years. And that was a really interesting experience, because it was definitely in that where, you know, in between academia and industry, and you get to see how you really have to work with the business groups. You can't just do blue skies research, you know. So it's kind of a discipline, I suppose, to learn that you had to present a business value proposition. I was always pushing against the grain there and trying to propose new areas of research that, you know, didn't always fly. I think eventually I got frustrated when decisions were being made, you know, a couple of levels above me about what research we would pursue and in what area. You know, you always, within an organization, doesn't matter how big the organization is, you do have to, you know, work with the organization. And I think eventually I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I wanted to make my own decisions. And it was very hard to leave. It was a great job. Like it was many years working there. You know, a lot of people envy the position in Bell Labs, you know, particularly in the space of AI. But, you know, so taking that leap is difficult. It's worth it. I think for me, it was kind of something probably that was gnawing away at me for a couple of years. So, you know, when I came, you know, looking at the space, I started looking at how my daughter was interacting with technology and reckoned there was so much that could be done there. So it was kind of like looking at my own daughter who was interacting with apps, web services, reading material, you know, digital apps that were trying to teach a child to read, and realizing, wow, this really needs speech recognition. Now, it wasn't like nobody ever thought about using speech recognition, but it was terrible. It was terrible. I can explain a little bit about why it was terrible for many years. And it just struck me as a massive opportunity. I'd spent my career to that point working in speech recognition. So it made sense that I could try and tackle this, and I could try and uncover what was the problem, how to solve it, and how to be really ambitious. And, you know, all those years working in a multinational really helped, actually, because these days we work with multinationals all the time. We work with big corporates. We're in boardrooms, closing deals. We're convincing people of the value proposition. And, you know, so having worked, I'd worked in some small companies before, having worked in multinational, then to founding my own company, it meant that experience really has stood to me, like, too, because I understand the fallibilities of big organizations. I understand how they fail to do some things, and I understand how slow they move and why they're slow to move. And all that really helps when you're building a business to compete and to sell into them as well. We're competing with some of the multinationals, we're selling into some of the other ones. And that honestly is really valuable experience. So some people, I remember one person said to me, God, do you not wish you just went into, you know, became an entrepreneur out of college? Or I go, no, I actually don't think I could have, you know. I would have been a very different entrepreneur, and I probably would have tackled different problems, but my experience to date has led us to where we are today. And I'm very grateful for all those experiences. So I'll just explain a bit about SoapBox Labs and what we do, and, you know, maybe that will explain a little bit more. So, you know, I founded the company 7 years ago. We build proprietary speech recognition technology, voice technology, whatever you want to call it. It's not off the shelf. There's a good reason for that. The off the shelf stuff doesn't work. So we had to build our own from the ground up deep learning solution. We focus solely on kids age 2 to 12. Loads of people ask us to start to do stuff for older kids or for adults or to expand. We don't do that. There's enough work in this. It's a global problem. So you know, the space is huge. It's not a small niche problem, you know, at all. And we are 30 people in the organization now. We have over 130 years of cumulative speech recognition expertise there. That's really crucial. That's really critical to our success. We've commercial and academic licenses all over the world. US, Europe, and Asia. There's been lots of awards and accolades for us, which is fantastic. You always need that as an organization, especially when, you know, an SME. So, you know, a lot of people wonder, well, why don't you just use Google? Why don't you just use Amazon? Why don't you just use what's off the shelf? Well, it's because it's very different. And this is what I figured back in 2013. Physically, the voices of children are very different. If you listen to a 2-year-old, 4, 6, 8-year-old, their voices change over time as well. They're physically smaller, thinner vocal tracts, smaller vocal folds, immature larynx, that actually changes the voice greatly. Their language is very different from adults. You know, the language structure is very different. You know, their behaviors, they elongate, they overpronunciate, they you know, say half words, they tend to stutter a lot. Like, how they speak is so different to adults. We're very disciplined. Actually, there's very little variability between the speakers, adult speakers, compared to the variability between child speakers. And that's huge, right? And the younger the child, the more different they are to adults. So yes, a 10, 12-year-old can sound quite mature, but you can just see how the younger they get, how different it gets, and how much more needed a bespoke solution is for children. The environments they inhabit are different. Kids are never in a quiet room. They just do not, until they're like tweens, they don't go into quiet rooms on their own, like, and then you can't get them out of them. But what they do is they sit with parents, with TVs, with they're in classrooms, wherever. All these environmental noise make the problem more complex as well. And they have very different privacy needs. Privacy needs is so much more sensitive, and that's really, really important and crucial to everything we've built. So a little example of how kids' voices change. On the top, this is a spectrogram, so frequencies lower to higher. And these are all normalized, so it doesn't matter how loud somebody said something, it's a normalized spectrogram. So it's just to illustrate where the frequencies are, so just to understand how physically different kids' voices are to kids. There's an adult male, an adult female, and this is the same child, my daughter, age 10, 7, and 4 over the years, all saying the same word, umbrella, which is really interesting. You can actually see there that the actual information is in a different part of the spectrum. It's spread much more. So if you've built a system from adult males and adult females, you can start to understand how they start breaking down the younger the child. Wrong way. So accuracy is really important. It's kind of what adults, we've all begun to expect from our speech recognition systems, our voice assistants, our Alexas, our Googles, our Siris. And it's only in recent years that they got less frustrating, and that's why we started using them. But accuracy for kids was like, it was like a decade older, like, you know, than what was around for adults. The problem is, in the use cases in particular, when you have low accuracy, you have false negatives and you have false positives. False negatives is telling a kid that they're wrong when they're right. Now, anybody who's ever told a kid they're wrong when they're right, you know how incensed they get. Like, they actually get boiling mad, like, you know. Equally, telling a kid they're right when they're wrong is actually not educational in that sense, or, you know, you're just going to have a weird conversation if it's an interaction. So often what happens is we default to these canned answers, you know, because, you know, we set the bar low, don't really know what the kids say, give them a canned answer. And trust me, a kid knows when they've been served a canned answer, especially when it's a few times, right? All those reasons, voice recognition for kids has failed to date. The accuracy has been so low because often it's been adult speech recognition used in child products. But what we've striven, what we've spent many years doing is striving for the high accuracy, even for the younger age groups as well as the older age groups. And that's been key to our widespread adoption now in the marketplace. And that's been key to success because, you know, mediocre speech recognition has been around for a long time. It's just never been widespread before because it was rubbish, basically. Interestingly, when I actually took a dive into the research, 35 years ago, there was a study that talked about, and I love the quote, was the results of the study indicate that speech recognition technology has the potential for reading, early reading instructions. 35 years ago. Do you think the person who wrote that ever thought it was going to take 35 years before it actually ever saw for the light of day in a product? Like, and that's really important, right? And I think that most people on the call who's into AI, you know, that's true. And a lot of times AI is very brittle. It doesn't work very well. It works in very narrow use cases, but the minute you go out into the real world or the minute you expand it, it starts to break down. And a lot of people don't understand that. They see a paper like that in 1985 and thinking it's just around the corner, you know, and it's not. And that's, I think we as in the industry have almost a duty to educate people not to get too excited, don't get carried away. It takes time, it takes investment, and that's really, really important. So why now? I mean, you guys know this, but I thought it's a useful thing to talk about. The advances in deep learning and NLP and NLU all were pretty much in the last 7 years, right? Because of access to GPUs, right? GPUs commonly available. And for a company like mine, when we founded in 2013, you know, when I was doing my PhD, I had to book time on a cluster to be able to do deep learning, right? Well, it wasn't called deep learning, it was just neural networks right back then. We had to book time on it, or I had to go work in IBM Research or Bell Labs in order to get access to these servers that could do the crunching, right? That wasn't, could you imagine as a startup with very little funding, I have to go spend like, you know, 20,000 outlay for servers to be able to do that? You can't do that. So until recently, startups couldn't play in this space, right? You couldn't play very competitively in this space. So all these factors here have lent itself to, this is the decade that we can take people on. We can take on multinationals in, you know, in space, and we couldn't do that before because we've now gone to on-demand cloud services. You can now pay for a GPU or CPU, whatever you need, in the cloud as you need it, not having to do the outlay. And that's really, really useful. Access data, fast connectivity, all these things together have lent itself to companies like ours being able to be successful, which we probably couldn't have done a decade ago. So our use cases, on the left, it's more about play. On the right is more about education. So, you know, we enable, so our technology, we license to third parties. So we never got into the game of building products for kids. We just license our technology for third parties to integrate into their toys, their robotics, their apps. On the other side, for their English language learning or any language learning, reading practice, reading assessments, dyslexia screening, speech therapy, accessibility is a big one. So all these use cases, the same underlying engine, the SoapBox Labs engine, we service all those industries through these products, basically. Some of them are features of products, others are actual just standalone products. So what we have done is built an engine that's flexible enough to be able to do pronunciation assessment for reading or English language learning, as well as being able multi-choice questions, comprehension questions. So all these things like formative readings, we do fluency assessment passages as well. And then the other side, the same engine we has been able to be delivered to have a conversation with a child. And it can be educational or just fun, do voice control, intent recognition, voice search, transcription. And then we've also just released a wake word product as well. So, I said earlier, privacy and accuracy are the two important things. Since 2013, we've been very conscious of the privacy aspects of dealing with data. We always knew the data is valuable, but back in 2013, we ensured that we were COPPA compliant. We worked with Prevo, actually. This is a safe harbor in the US. And I think a lot of that was being a parent. I knew that this was going to be important, even though nobody was talking about data privacy back then. It was like the Wild West. People were like sucking up data and nobody had a clue. Everybody was just using these services. But realizing, no, you know what? I think I'd be annoyed if I found out people had data. I never wanted to not be able to stand over our product in any way, shape or form by doing it the wrong way. So we were always COPPA compliant in the US and then GDPR compliant as necessary when it came here. And then we worked with an amazing amount of different research and academic organizations as well as commercial organizations to date.
Maybe before you just go ahead, because this is a point that struck me as one of those amazing intuition. As you said at the time where you were taking those decisions, I was coming off research in US and I was working on privacy for a few years. It was really an academic exercise at that point. There was no much business value. No one understood what it meant to do privacy on a bigger scale data, on data that are so vulnerable, so like data coming from kids, and you went 100% in on your privacy pitch. I remember from day one, and it's really interesting to try to understand what inspires you at that point. And there is also another question in the chat that says, did you also start right as a first idea for your startup around speech recognition, or you arrived at speech recognition after taking a few turns?
So first on the privacy thing, you know what, Ali, back in, what was it? It was about 2008. I was working in Bell Labs. I was working there for 2007, but around 2007, 8, 9, around that time, there was a lot of talk about, what did we call it back then? Big data. Do you remember that term?
Yes.
Big data. And I remember understanding when we worked in it was Bell Labs, Alcatel-Lucent, the value of data. And I remember I understood it because there was this issue that we had all this data flowing through our networks that we were going to do big data analysis on. It was fantastic. But the ownership issue came up. Yeah. And the ownership issue came up because even though the data was flowing through Alcatel-Lucent's networks, it was owned by the telcos that were renting the networks or buying the networks. We didn't own it. So even though we'd access to it, and I remember this whole conversation going on about, we were like, but it's such cool data. And they were going, it's not ours. Like, and I remember, I think that's what I was talking about a little bit. Sometimes working in the big multinational corporations gives you insights that maybe if you didn't work in them, you wouldn't understand. So I understood the value and the ownership of data. Plus, when I was doing my PhD, I went to work for IBM at the very end of my PhD in order to get access to their data set. Because they had the biggest data set in audiovisual speech recognition. And I needed it to finish my PhD because I'd done it on small sets, but it wasn't good enough for me. I wanted to prove it on the big set. So I had to go in, sit there and work on that set in order before I could publish on it, because they never let the data go outside the organization. So those, things. And actually another thing that informed me about data was how Google valued data back in the day. And I had friends who just, when I was finishing my PhD in New York, I had friends who went to work for Google and stuff. And there was a lot about how Google were doing the data collection. So all those experiences informed me about the value of data. But then I was a parent and I went, damn, I don't like the idea of you taking, Google taking my kids' data, right? So I had the sensitivity, I had the actual, gut reaction to, well, if that was my kid, I wouldn't be exactly thrilled about that. So it was those two. And then COPPA had just changed in 2012 to include audio and video data. So when I was starting to look at this in 2013, I was reading about the fact that COPPA had included audio and video, but it was still really vague. So I went and consulted with somebody and said, okay, what does this mean? And again, it was the experience working at Bell Labs, working on patents, working on talking to lawyers all the time. Like, what does it mean? What does these legal terms do? How could it come back to affect me? Because the way I was looking as well is I was founding a company. I was becoming very vulnerable as, I did not want any litigation. I did not want any laws. I knew it would take a company if we had any scandal or any whiff of impropriety or anything. So, but it was very hard to figure out, and it certainly wasn't cheaper and it wasn't quicker to do it that way. It actually took me quite a while because I couldn't just build infrastructure. I had to build infrastructure that had privacy built in. So if somebody contacted me and wanted the data deleted, I'd have to delete it like that. And I'd have to be audited. So I couldn't just develop a speech recognition system that didn't have a trail. So you can imagine how expensive that was. To do that, so that was a lot of my own personal investment in the first 2 years, because I reckoned if we were going to do this, we have to do it right. And you definitely could. I know that a lot of companies I was looking around, I actually almost felt stupid in the early days because I felt I was doing it right and they were all, it was like the Wild West, but I'm glad I did. What was the second question there you asked?
Did you start directly with speech recognition, or you arrived at after a few turns?
No, it was always speech recognition. I mean, look, that was my PhD, so that's everything I'd done for a long time. It was speech recognition. It was always speech recognition and kids. What has changed over the time is the ambition, right? So we started on the idea of, I was looking at the young kids and the early literacy, and I was thinking English language learning and young kids reading and sounds and phonetics, and how, if you pronounce the word hospital, which part of the word did you say correctly? And that's very good for English language learning training, but it's also good for kids' early literacy. But after a while, because I was thinking, oh, you know what, I'll start with, this is what we're going to do. And then also I said, because there's other people doing transcription, there's other people doing conversations, there's other people for kids. But after a while, when we were doing it really well, I went, oh God, they're not doing that bit very well. So we'll do that too. So then we moved on. And I was like, oh my God, seriously, is that as good as the industry is right now? We'll do that too. So what we did, we started to evolve the product, but it was very logical kind of progression. So it's not like we had an ambition in our head that, yes, we were going to do voice tech for kids, but how we got there was methodical. But it was building. And then we started doing it in multi-language. Now we're looking at taking it from the cloud to offline. So there's so many other challenges, but the thread has always been speech recognition for kids, but we've definitely expanded into toys and robotics and stuff like that. Whereas, maybe in the early days, I wouldn't have thought we would do that. I think very quickly, I might have had a flash at one point where I thought I would actually create the digital apps and products that the speech recognition would go in. But I think that thought lasted about 2 months. And then I looked at how you sell into the US school system and said, okay, no, not do that. You need a sales team and a content team. So I said, well, let's just do the bit we're good at and partner to do all the, that other stuff.
Yeah, there is an interesting question, actually, your transition between academia and industry, or from industry and your own startup company. How did you prepare yourself for those transition moments? Did you do anything explicitly, or it came natural on the things that you were doing?
God, no, blindly and stupidly, I would say my answer was. No thought whatsoever. No, I mean, I think I went from academia into, I finished the PhD, went into Bell Labs, and that was a difficult transition, I would say, because you didn't have as much freedom to do your publications, as many publications as you want, or you couldn't disclose everything you wanted to, because it's intellectual property for the company, and we had to kind of craft, and I found that frustrating. But then I enjoyed the other challenges, right? So, you know, I think we used to have these competitions in my labs where you got to pitch, you know, the moonshot projects and things like that. So, but you also potentially had, you know, funding behind you if you managed to win and convince people that you're, you had a little bit more freedom, as in you weren't always fighting for grants. So that was good, but you had less freedom in an academic sense and in what kind of research you could do or how deep you could go. And, you know, as the company evolved over time, we were definitely doing more and more stuff around having to, okay, a business group has to be interested. And that was such a drag, like, you know, in what we were doing. Making the leap into entrepreneurship was the biggest leap, I would say. I felt the other one definitely wasn't as big a leap. But that was just blind ignorance, really. Like, that was just, you know, I just wanted to try it, like, you know, and challenge myself in a different way. So it's probably as big as a decision as deciding to do a PhD in the first place or something like that. Or you know, making the decision you make the decision, you often don't understand what it means until you do it. But I don't think I've ever regretted any decision.
Anyway, your talk is fantastic. And by the way, people are so fascinated about your presentation. There are messages all over between the chat and the Q&As session. Many questions for you. But maybe let me read the last one, and then you maybe go there. Patricia will stay with us with 10 other minutes, and she will respond to some of those questions. So Juliana has a nice question, and she is asking, regarding speech recognition for children working well on the education side or more on the toy side, and if this is going to incentive parents to buy more toys and product with having more speech recognition technology embedded in those toys. So the difference between education and the entertainment world, and whether this is pushing products much farther than what we have today.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, there's a whole world of smart toys that's only beginning, right? So, you know, my son pretty much wants every smart toy in the product, but they're just kind of rubbish right now, or they're very expensive, unfortunately. So they are very different to education. Our engine is the same. So our engine is our acoustic models, our language models, our natural language processing, all that's the same. How it's delivered is via different API points. So we do, you know, for pronunciation assessment, we have an API point to do kids reading practice, to do a fluency assessment. They're just, sometimes it's algorithms on top of our engine, and sometimes it's just delivering a different what's returned, because what our clients do is just send the audio or stream the audio, and then we just it's very simple curl requests, and we just return in like a couple of 100 milliseconds a response. So they can actually have, it could be used in a game, it's that quick, like, you know. So, but on the toy side of things, the reason that hasn't advanced is because you always have to connect with a Bluetooth to the Wi-Fi. And then, you know, I don't know if any parents ever tried to pin the ass. You know, you have this, you put this device, and then you have to get your phone and get the app, and then you have to connect it. It's terrible, and it never works when you move it at all. But what's happened is they're very expensive. Anything like that's very expensive. You're talking about a costly toy, and it hasn't moved. So what we're trying to do is, you can have amazing experiences using voice on a toy that doesn't have a screen, which I think is really important. You can actually have, you know, imagine the kid talking to the toy and the toy talking back, or remembering their favorite color or something, you know, playing games, and, you know, the content can change, but it's without a screen. And I think that's kind of a really interesting place. We know a lot of the toy companies are really interested in exploring this, but it has to be at a price point that's low enough. So you can't put the processor that's in a phone in a toy. It becomes a $300 toy, even with a cheap Android, right? So we're working now with companies on really low cost embedded chips that can actually hold our technology in an efficient way that's battery conserves the battery for long playtime, low cost, because the toy industry is notoriously cheap and small margins on things, but can still do state-of-the-art deep learning. And so that's where it's going. And you can do it with images, you can do it with everything. And the beauty about that is no data will leave the device. So you get it on a chip, like all the privacy concerns are melt away. Like it's definitely, this is, and that's where, you know, I'm very hopeful the industry we're already there. We just have to get the stuff out to the market. It's a technical challenge, but I think it's a worthy one.
And on this note, I want to take the opportunity to thank you so much. I've heard you talking so many times, but every single time is a renewed pleasure. Thank you for staying with us. There are a few questions for you in the Q&A session. Please, otherwise we'll circle them back to you later. Thank you again, Patricia. I know you are very busy. We appreciate it. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks.
Wadi, back to you.
Thank you, Patricia. It was a very unique and inspiring journey. Entrepreneurship is all about taking the leap, and I'm sure our audience have gotten the inspiration from you to take the leap. So our next guest on the list of panelists today is Angela Bates from IBM. Angela, feel free to take over the screen while I provide a brief introduction. Angela has an extensive amount of experience in the startup ecosystems. She's the European Programs Leader for IBM Developer Ecosystems Group. She holds an MBA from Kingston University. She's a startup champion, a creative entrepreneur, and a dedicated advocate of developers. She is currently leading developer advocacy programs at IBM. After starting a career as a sales engineer at HP, she has since worked with several small and medium-sized organizations to nurture programs that build trusted relationships with technical audience and community influencers. In 2010, she launched IBM's first set of startup programs, which is the IBM Global Entrepreneur and the IBM Smart Camp pitch competition. Now I'll let Angela take over.
Thanks very much for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to talk as well. And I have the hugest of admirations for anyone like Patricia, who's got a startup business, a huge amount of work that goes into those businesses. But as the introduction said, I've spent my time being an entrepreneur within a large corporate, which has a kind of different set of challenges, but also a little bit of protection as well, which is kind of nice. So I wanted to share with you a couple of examples of the way that I and working within IBM have been able to attract and develop innovation by working with startups. The relationship, I think, with corporates and startups is sometimes a very strained one and difficult to make a success. But like the introduction said, I spent the past 10 years trying to find a way to make this work, and hopefully I'll sort of share with you examples of things that you might find inspiring if you'd like to try and work with IBM as a startup yourself. But first of all, I just want to say what an amazing time it is to be a technologist right now. And thanks, I think, in part to 3 waves of technologies that are coinciding to put the incredible power of technologies that perhaps in the past would only be available to the largest of corporations and the richest of budgets. But those 3 waves of technology are, firstly, the invention of the internet. What would we do without the internet? Secondly is the rise of cloud technologies, which we're now able to fragment those incredibly complex and powerful technologies into manageable services. So those services like artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, data privacy, cybersecurity are now available as individual components on the cloud rather than having to buy large amounts of expensive software. And then the third piece of technology is open source software. What an amazing way for innovators to share what they have created, and which really breaks down the barriers to innovators and makes that available at little or no cost. An amazing advancement to every developer, data scientist out there. But with so much information at our fingertips as technologists ourselves, developers and data scientists now are businesses' greatest assets to help them control the explosion of data in their organizations and to provide more customer-centric experiences and to create that competitive advantage, and even maybe to change the world. So 4 years ago, IBM decided to change the focus. We had been working a lot with startup founders and business owners. And we still do that. And I'll explain our startup program later on. But 4 years, we decided to, because of the power that developers and data scientists actually have themselves, is to put that power in their hands and ask them what they would create to change the world. So we created a set of programs to put the resources in the hands of the technologists themselves. And the result of that has been the formation of some incredible startup company collaborations with IBM that really are changing the world for good. So I just want to share that one of those programs with you. And it's called the Call for Code. It's something that we started 3 years ago and has turned into actually the largest engagement of developers in history that are developing solutions for tech for good. So Call for Code is an annual competition. It's a challenge that inspires developers to solve some of the world's most pressing problems. And we started off with a challenge around what would you do to help combat the effects of natural disasters. And every year we come up with a similar related challenge to really inspire developers. And we put a lot of effort in the collaboration, the ecosystem around building those challenges, and it's supported mainly by the United Nations, but also lots of others of partners and of our clients as well. And what we found this year, we've had over 400,000 developers that take part in the challenge, over 180 countries. We've had 15,000 entries. So these are new business ideas that have come forward as a result of the competition. So here's some of the examples. This is the timeline starting at the bottom of some of those competitions. So as I say, we started off back in 2018 with a competition around natural disasters and looking at solutions that would improve the preparedness of communities to if a natural disaster like a hurricane was on its way. Last year, we also focused on natural disasters, but with the focus on health and the well-being of individuals that had been affected by natural disasters. This year, though, this year has been the year that the world has faced even more challenges than ever before. So in addition to our regular focus on climate change, we also have had short notice challenges that we've put out to the community, obviously around COVID-19, and looking for solutions that address crisis communication, remote learning for children and for students, and also to help local communities cooperate together that have been affected by COVID-19. And our current running spot challenge is around racial justice as well. And next year we have plans to carry on with our focus on climate change, but also have these short-term challenges during the year that will enable us to address problems for the world as they come along. So what have been the results of these calls for code to our developer and startup community? So we've got 3 fantastic new businesses that have been generated as a result of those competition. This year's winner in 2020 is Agroli. They have created an application which is already now available to download on Google Play, which helps connect small farmers around the world, particularly in emerging countries where crop yields have been reduced by climate change. And they have built that with technology from IBM and data from the Weather Company, which is an IBM company. And with these winners, we also provide cash to the company to help them get them off the ground, but also the support from IBM technologists to make sure the technology is robust and genuinely works. In 2019, our winner Prometheo, they have an IoT device for firefighters to help them assess the air, the quality that they're breathing in and the effects of their health during their work. And our first winner, Project Owl, is an IoT, again, an IoT device to help first responders connect with victims when regular communications systems like mobile phones, etc., might be down. So it actually uses different technology to help first responders to connect together. And all of these now are new companies that are in deployment and are raising funds independently of IBM as a result of the competition that we ran. So that's been a really exciting project to work with to help generate new startups from the ground up. But as I started when I talked about how I sort of started this entrepreneurship with IBM, it was all about how innovators could work with large corporates. And the original IBM Global Entrepreneur Program now has become part of our portfolio of regular business partner programs that we offer to companies no matter what stage they are at. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Startup with IBM, as this is all about entrepreneurship. So this is our regular business partner program that can put the power of technologies like artificial intelligence in your hands at little or no cost, but also all the support that we give to companies as they grow. So the main highlights of our startup program then are around the technology. We're a technology company, so the focus is always going to be about the tech. So the main part of that is the provision of technologies on the cloud to startup companies with free credits to spend on the technologies that you want to incorporate in your solution, which includes our Watson portfolio of artificial intelligence, our blockchain, data analytics, and cybersecurity technologies. They're there for you to use. I think the base level is $1,000 of credit per month, but we can take that up to $10,000 for those that are working with accelerator programs. But what I really wanted to focus on was about learning new skills, because technology is all very good, but if you don't know what to do with it or you don't know how to use it, then it all kind of falls apart. So that's mainly the team that I work with right now is a team of developer advocates that work with communities at no charge to help them be successful in the technologies that they're working with. And the way that we do that in the IBM developer organization is through code, content, and community. So on the code, we actually use those technologies ourselves and build sample code patterns that you can download for free. But many of our software developers contribute towards open source projects and collaborate with others through the open source community. They also spend a lot of their time writing blogs, tutorials, and guides for developers to help them create new things. And then finally, on the community, we spend a lot of our time running events. In the past, obviously, it would have been face-to-face workshops, but we've moved that almost seamlessly this year online to deliver hands-on workshops so that developers can learn everything from the basics of flow programming on Node-RED right through to how to work with mainframe. So we do a raft of free hands-on workshops that are streaming live every day on Twitch and Crowdcast for developers to come along and learn with us. We also here's some examples of some of the communities we run. Some of those pictures are obviously from times before COVID with us all together, but it's always been about working in the communities with new projects and interesting ideas from startups and developers and data scientists, no matter where they work. So it would be lovely to see you. If you're ever interested in finding out more about technologies, come along and join us. So just finally then, that was a very brief flip through of the sort of projects that I've been involved in. If you're interested in Call for Code and being part of, if you have a business idea, or even if you don't and you're just interested in joining one of the competitions and forming a team, then Call for Code is a brilliant competition. As I said, currently we have a competition around racial justice, but our main challenge of the year will be next year. It normally announces around February, and then the deadline for submissions is normally in the summer, so there's a few months to put something together. So Call for Code is a great competition to join. The second thing maybe is if you're interested in joining our community of developers and data scientists, then join our meetup groups. The one that I run 3 in the UK called IBM Code. So you can join that one, or Ronan, and my colleague in Ireland, runs IBM Cloud. So join our meetup groups, because that's where our developers talk about the things that they've been working on, but also help other developers to help their dreams come true. And also, if you're interested in joining any of our hands-on workshops, then watch us on Crowdcast, IBM Developer Europe. And as I say, we're streaming every day. We have a brilliant lunchtime data science on a Monday lunchtimes every single week. You can do a hands-on workshop with our resident data scientist, Margaret Grunning, and she's done some brilliant things, really advanced stuff, but also some basics as well. So learn with Marguerite on a Monday. That would be brilliant to see you.
Amazing, Angela. What an interesting program from IBM. And we are also having the CTO of IBM join and tune to listen to this event today, who is also providing you the information about those meetup. Ronan Dalton, thank you for being with us and supporting us. Angela, there are questions for you if you want to look at the Q&A. Okay. And we'll get back for some final question at the end of the event. So now back to Swati and moving to our next IBM speaker.
Thank you, Angela. That was very insightful and very interesting to look at. The links are on the chat, as Alessandra said. A reminder to everyone here, please post your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat, because Q&A is more accessible for us. So who are we listening to next? Next, it's Yufang Hu from IBM. Yufang, please feel free to share the screen. Yufang is going to talk about something that's going to blow your mind. Yufang is a research assistant at IBM, a research scientist at IBM Research. She was a member at Project Debater. Her research interests include anaphora resolution, computational argumentation, and information extraction from scientific literature. She also received 2020 WOC STEM Technical Innovations in Industry Award. Yufang holds a PhD in computational linguistics. Now I will let Yufang take over. Yufang, you're on mute.
We can see perfectly your slide.
Okay, great. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Sorry about that. All right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the introduction. I'm very happy to talk about Project Debater for the next 10 minutes. So first, I'd like to go back to look at a little bit the history of the Grand Challenge within IBM. So at IBM Research, every 5 years, so we will put our resources together, try to push the boundary of AI. So back in 1997, we had the first computer called Deep Blue, which defeated a world champion in chess. So in 2011, we had a Watson QA system, which defeated the best human players in Jeopardy. So after this event, we were asking ourselves, okay, what will be the next grand challenge? So around in 2014 and 2015, so IBM Research launched a new grand challenge. It's called Project Debater. So the goal is to have the computer which can debate with the human in a meaningful way. The project was led by IBM Haifa Lab. It's a global collaboration, and from the Dublin lab, me and a few other colleagues are involved in this project for the past couple of years. So in 2019, last year, February, in San Francisco, for the first time, our debater system participated in a live debate with a human expert debater, Ms. Harris. So in front of the live audience. So the debate is in the Oxford style format, which means we will have a human moderator who will announce the motion, such as we should subsidize preschool. After this, each part, one is like our system, the other is a human debater. We'll have like 10 minutes for preparation. After that, each side will deliver 4 minutes opening speech, following by a 4 minutes rebuttal speech, and finally 2 minutes closing speech. So after this, the audience will vote which part is better in different dimensions, such as whether it's more convincing, whether it helped me to understand the topic better. This event attracts a lot of media attentions. So after that, we had hundreds of the leading newspapers report this event. Early this year, we also released a documentary called The Debater. So this film tells the research stories behind the scene. So both the live debate and the documentary are available on YouTube. If you are interested, please check them out. Now I will talk about, I will briefly talk about the research side on this project. So in order to generate the output, which essentially the 3 speeches. So we have the argument mining component, which means given a motion such as we should subsidize preschool, our system will go over a very big corpus, which consists of around 400 million articles, try to identify claims and evidence related to this motion. And after that, we will do the stance classification, try to figure out whether the evidence support or attack the claim. We also build an argument knowledge base, which we use to construct our argument later on. And remember, since this is a live debate, which means our system is supposed to capture the main claims raised by our human debater. So our rebuttal component is responsible to detect what are the main claims raised by the human being and what should be the effective counter-argument we should use later on. So given all of these pieces from these 3 components, argument mining, knowledge base, and the rebuttal component, finally, our debate construction component will put all of these pieces together and try to generate a coherent narrative. Finally, we will run text to speech, which will generate these 3 output: opening speech, second speech, and finally the summary speech. All right, so for the past 5 years, so I've been seeing that computational argumentation is really emerging as a new research area in NLP, natural language processing, and it has nicely overlapped with different topics such as dialogue system, natural language generation, text summarization, also discourse and pragmatics. And also, like, we should also take care of the social part of the NLP. Like the generate argument should persuasiveness, but in the same time, we should take care of the social bias and also fact verification. So along this journey, and so IBM Research actively participated in the different research agendas in this direction. Up till now, we published more than 50 papers in the top tier conferences. And also we released a lot of high quality data set in this research direction. And both the publications and the data sets are available at our research portal. If you are interested, also please check them out. Finally, I will talk about a little bit about how we roll our research into products. So at this moment, our project debate technologies are available for business use cases. So we packed the APIs into our cloud containers. We also have a research early access program, which we partnered with different customers and then try our debate technology in their use cases. And finally, so we have a few components available in Watson products, such as advanced sentiment analysis, also the key points extraction from text. So here is a UI demonstrate how customers can use a debater API given a text and then topic, and then the customer can call our API to identify claims, evidence, and do stance classification. This example is called debater speech by crowd. The idea is like we want to build a new communication channel between decision maker and those impacted by the decision, such as company and its customers, or the employer and its employees. So by doing so, the companies or like the employers can use our platform and then gathering all the related information from its customers or the employees in terms of like the specific topic, and then we run our platform and identify what are the valid arguments and then what are the key points, and finally generate two coherent narrative, one on the pro side, the other on the con side. And then we hopefully with this, and then the decision makers can identify what are the prevalent opinions and then make the right decision in the end. I think I will stop here. And if you have any questions regarding the speed or the research side, also the product side, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Fantastic. Back to Swati, and please, Yufang, there are questions for you in the Q&A. Start to have a look at there, and then we'll have some question at the end. Swati, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yufang. It was a great breakthrough in the field of text processing. I hope you get to do more and more in this field. A reminder to everyone here, you can post your questions on the Q&A box. And also there's one other small request from us. If you can, we'll post a feedback link on the chat. If you can give us a small feedback, it would be very useful for us for the future events. We can do it better with your feedback. So
completely anonymous.
Yeah, it's anonymous, so feel free to vent whatever you want. So this session is going on really well, and it's absolutely impressive with our speakers. Our next and final guest of the day is Ger O'Keeffe. Ger, please feel free to take over the screen while I provide a brief introduction. Ger is the CEO and co-founder of Always With You, always spelled with a double L. Since 2017, Ger has worked as a technology entrepreneur and is a co-founder of Azure Medical Limited, a women's health company, Acrovation, an IoT system integration services company, Agrify, an agri-tech solutions company, and Always With You, a platform to support older adults on their wellness journey. Before 2017, Ger worked with Intel as EMEA business leader for IoT, where he has performed multiple roles, including engineering, marketing, management, sales, and business operations. Ger also has experience in energy and smart grid market segments and the intelligent transport system market segment with Intel. Ger holds a PhD in applied physics. So Ger will talk to us about his experience building Always With You. Ger, I will let you take over now.
Thanks, Swati, and thanks to IBM and to the Women in AI for inviting me along this morning, or this afternoon, I guess. Real pleasure to be here and to get to talk a little bit about my journey and learnings and, I guess, mistakes. Focus on many of the mistakes and hopefully offer an opportunity for everybody to learn from those and maybe comment as to what we might do differently next time, if there is a next time. And as well as the entrepreneurship, we'll obviously talk a little bit in more detail on Always With You itself and what the platform is all about and how we intend and are starting to use IA to extend the value proposition of the platform. So kicking off and talking a little bit about my experience on entrepreneurship, I guess, like Patricia mentioned and spoke so well earlier, one of the critical first step from my perspective is to establish a strong market perspective of the segment you're going to work in. It sounds very simple and it's easy to write in a PowerPoint, but of course it may take many years. I spent 20 years with Intel, and while I worked in tech and moved on to work in more business and strategy, it's that broad experience, understanding how multinationals, as Patricia mentioned earlier, how they work, and getting that perspective could take a long time, or it may be something you can do very quickly by bringing the right team in around the startup. So point number one here is about establishing that market's perspective. And once you have that proper perspective and the dynamics of the market, the commercials of the market, you can then, over time, maybe understand a specific problem and ultimately a solution, and how that solution might fit in addressing the problem. And of course, point number two here, again, is not straightforward, because ultimately your solution ideally has to be novel and inventive. And it's time to start discussing the details with your patent attorney in an ideal scenario. So again, not trivial tasks, but important to crystallize them, I think. Moving on, I would definitely then be thinking very quickly around your UX, UI, and ensuring within your team you've got good design and good user testing people, critically important. And of course, that's even more so important than coding at this point. And deprioritizing a little bit the coding versus UX UI is critically important, I would definitely say. So we're talking now about having a founders team and focusing on your MVP, your minimum viable product, and how you deliver that to the market as quickly as possible. Critical activities from a founders team to enable that. And from there, we're moving on to go-to-market strategy. And I've found that over the years, people, entrepreneurs maybe, or business leaders talk and strategize around go-to-market for a long time, and with all different PowerPoints and versions of what you're going to do. My real advice here is talk less about it, but get to the first step and test it, because the PowerPoint and the strategy becomes much easier once you've actually tested the first step, and then you've got a real story and something tangible to talk about. And throughout this whole process, I would be suggesting that you always plan for failure, have a plan B. Try to reduce the program risk, and I guess ultimately your personal risk, by having strong partnerships. And this is ultimately where IBM and our partnership with IBM was important, because it allows to reduce the risk and through the IBM ecosystem, because ultimately we got to deploy our MVP, test our MVP without having to take additional risk. And that ultimately is one of the key values of the program from our perspective. So by following this recipe, I'm not sure if that video is blocking my screen or not, but by following this recipe over the last number of years, I've managed to create a number, basically a portfolio of startups. Not all were successful, and that's critically important. Like I mentioned, you need to be in a position where you can back out without taking a losing at a personal risk perspective. And that's what happened here with our first startup, which was an IoT services company, which was actually probably the market I knew best. But where it probably failed is that we didn't have sufficient novelty in our solution. And that allowed us to learn, and from those learnings we in fact ended up to creating a number of other startups, very diversified. This one here is an ag tech company. This company is already selling internationally in New Zealand and Brazil into ag tech, an extremely different market segment, but a lot of the fundamentals that we're talking about here are essentially very similar and very much of an overlap. Number two here is Assura Medical. It's a femtech, women's health company, medical device, developed a solution for recurrent urinary tract infections, which is again extremely different market segment. And we are moving towards clinical trial in the US and in Europe on this new groundbreaking product. And finally, always with you, back to IoT, back to AI, and I guess back to the rest of this discussion. So there's a quick intro and some thoughts from my perspective. And with that, let's take maybe a deeper look here into Always With You and figure out what this is all about. So what this company is about is addressing this market of home care delivery. If any of us on the call have parents, maybe elderly parents, ultimately there comes a stage in their lives where they may need additional help through home care. It's a complex market, and it's becoming more and more relevant. And COVID, of course, has rang a lot of alarm bells in terms of how care is delivered, not just in Ireland, but globally, and how do we ensure that people who want to age at home can do so in a safe manner. Three key personas here, and the first one being the family member, somebody like you and I. We refer to John as a persona. This is representing, Rogine is representing our parent who might be, would be an elderly person maybe at home. And thirdly, there's a home care service provider who is a company that's probably engaged by the Department of Health, or in Ireland here by the HSE, to deliver that home care. And in Ireland, there's a move towards ensuring that every citizen in the country has, or is in a position to receive home care ultimately from the HSE or the Department of Health. So this is the challenge that we're trying to address with Always With You, and building a platform essentially that supports the delivery of care to older adults by monitoring activities, key metrics, medicine taking routines, using the AI engine to flag issues, make recommendations, and improve well-being, thereby extending the time that people can safely live in our own homes. And that safely living in our own homes is essentially, again, not just an Irish goal, but I think it touches everybody, including myself. I want to ensure that when I get to that age, I know what a good personal goal would be in terms of activity. You know, if I've got maybe a cardiac diagnosis, then I know that the system is taking into account my own personal situation and challenging me in a realistic and appropriate way to ensure that every day I live, I'm striving towards better wellness and overall health. So the platform to visit looks a little bit like this, I guess. Just to point out that we're just about to prepare for, I guess, a relaunch essentially of the platform. We're very much open to families jumping in and trying it out. And I guess what I was going to point out over the next few minutes is just to give you a quick walkthrough of what the system actually does. And before we get into it, I want to just to explain that the way the system does work is, if you are a family member signing up to Always With You, you basically have the ability to pull in other family members, maybe best friends, close friends of the person that it is you're caring for, the person that ultimately receiving the care. So there's two ends to this pipe essentially. At one end, there's the family circle, and at the other end is the person receiving the care. So from the point of view of the family member, and what their experience will be like, just to walk through it very quickly. And we're looking now from John's perspective, if you remember. So John and all the family members will essentially get a real-time update through their device, through the app, through the platform, as to how the person, Rogine in this case, if you remember, is doing. You know, have they managed to adhere to their medication schedule? Have they done, I guess, enough activity on that day? What has their sleep quality been like? And what recommendations can the system make so that we can challenge them a little bit to go that little bit further in striving towards better wellness. So this is what the insights, and ultimately insights here is the output from the AI engine. But what the input to the AI engine, of course, is all these sensors that are, we talk about both external sensors, which is when maybe Rogine is wearing a smartwatch, which monitors sleep, activity, cardiac, and so on. But there's also the what we call internal sensors, because on the platform we are supporting the family and Rogine in her medication schedule. We are also tracking to see how they're responding to content, how much time are they using the system, and so on. So we got a number of internal sensors, but we have a whole range of external sensors, and you can see some of them here, some of the cards, cardiac, body weight, and so on. And some of them may not all be connected. For instance, this one here, this sensor, this data stream is not connected, but we're giving the family the option to make as many of these cards live so that they get different data streams coming in depending on what the condition of Rogine and her situation might be. I mentioned medication schedule, so it's got a built-in schedule, and medication schedules are very complex, typically for older people or for people in general these days. And we might know from our own parents, our own personal experience, you know, what is the medication schedule? What is the timing? Was there a change to the schedule? How do we help remind our parents around that schedule, especially if there's dementia or other conditions involved? And finally, what the platform does, it has this content sharing, a content management system, which allows anybody in the family circle to easily share content from other social media or from any device, whether it is digital or whether it is audio, photo, or video, so that the family is doing essentially all the hard work in arranging the content in a way so that they can easily and quickly access that content. We were familiar with WhatsApp, but one of the challenges of WhatsApp to do this is that, you know, maybe a few days or a few weeks down the road, they're going back trying to find content, always which you allows the family members to easily and kind of arrange that content in a way that makes sense for the family. So back to Rogine then, what does the person on the other end of the pipe, if you remember, see? So they're on a device, it can be any device, Apple, Apple or Android or whatever, and they're basically here getting their reminders, getting their new content being shared, instant video calling, and of course they're now getting also feedback on how they're doing in terms of activity, and they're getting to see how they're doing versus their goals, their personal goals. So they get a one-stop shop essentially of viewing as to how they're doing in terms of their overall wellness and health. Our strategy, just to explain in terms of the devices and sensors, is that we use off-the-shelf standard devices. We were a software-only company, a SaaS company, and so we help families basically identify what is the appropriate sensors that will best suit their needs across the whole range of data streams that I mentioned earlier. And as we go forward, we intend to continue integrating with all these other device providers and benefit from the data value. So the AI engine itself, just to get into it a little bit more, so we're using off-the-shelf sensors to feed into our models. We have both external data sources and internal to the platform itself. So ultimately, we're creating these models, personal models that understands if there's a disease baseline or not, and to use that to basically detect abnormalities in the data so that we can send alerts to the family. We can send ultimately recommendations to the family and goals to Rogine that challenges Rogine to basically improve her wellness based on what's feeding into the system. So that's a quick overview, and I guess the goal here is obviously to be able to send more meaningful insights to the family circle and to Rogine so that things can, in terms of their wellness, continue to stay on a good path. So right now we're developing these models, we're expanding our AI team, And if this topic is of interest, please ping me, because we expect to be expanding our team significantly in the coming in H1 of next year. I guess from a messaging point of view, we're very much using AI and the power of AI here to do good, and it's to help every family ultimately. Very often AI gets maybe, or sometimes gets bad press, and it's used in ways that are maybe not that beneficial to society and mankind. But we're obviously trying to change that here. So in summary, and to wrap this up, a very obvious point here is back to entrepreneurship. You know, really define your problem statement and get a market perspective over time, which is not a trivial thing to do. Take the first steps quickly and really check your go-to-market strategy, and take the first step rather than dwelling on it for too long. Because if you can get through and be comfortable with the outcome of testing your MVP, then essentially you're up and running. You're on the first step of the ladder, and from there on, it becomes more obvious how you climb the ladder and get your team up and running, and company running for properly. Just to reiterate, reduce the program risk via strong partnerships, and that's where our work with IBM and through the startup program that was mentioned earlier by Angela, that's what was really powerful and beneficial to us. So thank you, IBM, and thank you, Women in AI. And I'll wrap up at that.
Thank you, Ger. What an amazing talk. Back to Swati.
Thank you so much, Ger. The elderly are people who we really want to care for, but then we just really can't because we're so busy. I'm sure this is going to help a lot of people in doing just that. So next we are moving on to question and answer session. So I am going to read out one question for each of our panelists here. So first question to Angela. So Angela, what kind of support does IBM give for initial customer acquisition and marketing?
Thanks for the question there, and I'm not quite sure how to answer it, to be honest with you. You know, as I said during my talk, you know, IBM is a technology company at heart, and so therefore, you know, the focus of most of our programs are on the provision of the technology itself and the support of the developers building the technology. So that's our specialty. That's what we do. But of course, we do have connections with clients, and also through our reseller channels and our partnerships. So building those ecosystem opportunities is absolutely something that we do for companies that have built with IBM technology. So, you know, I talked about the startup program with IBM. That's step one. But beyond that, then there's a market with and sell with and other business partner programs that go on from there. So my recommendation is to get the technology right to begin with, make that super good, use all of the resources at your opportunity, and then move through the journey with IBM. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much, Angela. The next question to Yufang. So text-based research in AI has grown linearly, starting from simple spam identification to chatbots to project debater. What do you see as the future of this growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say like so the past 5 years we've seen a lot of the changes in the world of the NLP with these big transformer models, and then now I've seen for the first time NLP has the capacity to have like the impact applications in Word. So right now, if like with speech recognition, machine translation, and then that's a kind of like the product we're all familiar with the NLP applications, and now with Project Debater, so we're trying to to build a product which can like hopefully can like help people get better information when they want to make a decision. So this is like the one of the area where we were trying to push the boundary. But I think in terms of the future, I've seen, because all of this big data, well, with all of the massive data, and then now a lot of problems are starting emerging, like data privacy, and then whether we have the whether we will not use this data. And another problem is like the bias. Remember when I talk about the project debater, so we extract this information from the data. If the data is biased, which means the output we generated is also biased, and then and then this I've seen this is the trend in the future, and then we want to like how to debias, how to avoid biased opinions. I've seen this is a big trend in terms of the research and also in terms of product, because when we build a product, we want to make sure the product is not biased for sure.
Thank you so much, Yufang. So next question for Ger. So Ger, you were talking about you have different partnerships with different startups targeting different market segments, though they are very specific and niche. So how important do you think is to relate to the problem you're solving, like relate to the market segment that you're solving, targeting?
Critically important, of course, but whether it is, so you have a team, a founders team, at least some of the members of that co-founders team needs to have first-hand experience in the market. Maybe not everybody has to have that first-hand experience, but that's and if you don't have that, you know, you're not really at the races. I would maybe add to that as well, and ideally not just having a market perspective, but having a global market perspective. Again, the three easy words to verbalize, but it may take many, many years to get that perspective.
There is also another question which is quite interesting and has an interesting twist. Do you feel the social robot will have a place in the future and in Always With You solution?
It's a tricky one, I suppose, and I struggle a little bit with it. I would say that, you know, depending on that demographic, you know, let's say our target demographic is maybe 65 to 100 years. In terms of their willingness to adopt technology, depending on the country, you know, it's still maybe not pervasive within the demographic in terms of tech. So, you know, the simplest expectation around smartphones and apps, realistically in the market, it's still, in terms of the percentage adoption, is still quite low. But of course, that's going to change, right, as we go forward, next 5-10 years and so on. So the willingness to adopt more and more tech within that demographic as we go forward will increase. Will it go all the way to social robots? Of course, there's an argument that it will, but I would wait till I'm maybe convinced by data. So I would question it, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Fantastic. Swati, back to you. I think we are at the end of it, right?
Yeah, we are.
Perfect. So let me thank you tremendously. Our speaker today were very inspiring, and I really hope our audience has felt the enthusiasm, the journey, the experience, and have embraced this as an opportunity that can really become your next step and change your life. I have greatly enjoyed to listen to Patricia, to Angela, to Yufang and Ger equally. Different stories, different journey, but amazing result to share and to make accessible to everyone. I also would like to thank you again. The support of IBM for this event has been crucial in having us amazing speaker to the panel today, organizing this event. And I really hope many people can see how big company also provide many ways to support the entrepreneurship journey and really help entrepreneurs to be successful in more comfortable and supported environment. So special thank you to Swati to be today our fantastic moderator. Has been amazing, Swati. You did an excellent job. Begun in the background with the remaining of the Women in AI Ireland team. Thank you everyone, and I hope you enjoy. Leave us your comment in the questionnaire that we have shared so that we know how we can improve those programs moving forwards. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.